The idea of quarantine and self-isolation, most people agree this was an idea to give hospitals chance to catch up, get that capacity, different so they can actually handle patients. And it seems by and large they have done that. President wants states to start reopening to get people back to work. Is that a bad thing right now?
Well, all of us want to be getting back to our jobs, back to our lives. I think also all of us want to be safe. And we know that lives depend on whether this is done well or poorly. Now, unfortunately, the president about 2 months ago said that everybody who wants a test can get it. That was a lie then, and it's not true even now, 2 months later. We need to have greater testing capacity in order to be able to reopen safely. That way, communities that don't have a lot of the virus can make sure they're catching any outbreaks, and ones that are experiencing a lot of infection can trace everybody who's been infected and make sure that we can run that down and keep people safe. The reality is it's never going to be the exact same as it was before. We can come out of this stronger if we have the right kind of leadership. I think Governor Whitmer's shown that kind of leadership, and I think Vice President Biden is demonstrating what it would look like for us to have a president who is focused not on politics, not on name calling, not on trashing his predecessor, but just on getting things done.
Okay, you talked one thing about the president said anyone who can get a test can get one. That was not true then, and you're right, it's not true now. But GOP Chairwoman McDaniel sent out some statistics last day or so, and I want to run some of these by you. This is what the federal government has distributed. She says 75 million N95 masks, 112 million surgical masks, 18 million gallons, a billion gloves, 100,000 ventilators by the end of the year, 8.7 million tests, which they are not wrong when they say that is more than any other country in the world. So when we are testing more than any other country in the world, why is there still criticism coming from the left at the president when we are doing that volume of testing?
Well, it's very simple. We are testing less per capita than many other countries. So if we have more tests than Iceland, yeah, of course we do. We're also a million times larger, or 1,000 times larger in terms of population. Look, the bottom line is we need a plan to get the kind of testing the American people need in order to be safe. Many researchers say we would need as many as 5 million tests to 20 million tests every single day in order to reopen safely. The American people are up to that job, but this White House is not.
Okay, well, the White House, as you mentioned it, we don't have the tests that many of the experts say we need to reopen. Even by the White House's standard, as far as I saw, not one state has met the White House's own guidelines for reopening, yet several states are, including Michigan. Is Governor Whitmer wrong to start reopening when they have not hit those thresholds?
I think the most important thing is to be responding to facts on the ground. What we're seeing now are health experts on the ground, mayors often on the ground, who are offering real-time feedback. And in some parts of the country, like Georgia, you see governors acting to basically crush whatever the mayors are trying to do. Other states like Michigan, where there's a much more collaborative approach, and I think that's going to serve communities well. This doesn't have to be a one-size-fits-all solution, but what would be very helpful at a time like this is to have real presidential leadership instead of constantly changing, contradictory, and often very political statements coming out of the highest office in the land in the middle of a national emergency. It's why I'm supporting Joe Biden, somebody who cares about getting something done, and I think cares about us much more than the kind of backbiting and the kind of cruelty even that's coming out of the White House now.
Okay, you're obviously you're on air right now and you're supporting Joe Biden. One thing I did want to point out, the economy before the pandemic hit was by most metrics good. Not the best in history, as the president repeatedly falsely claims, but it was good by very many measures. So how do you convince people to change their vote from a president who was leading a good economy to someone else when the economy tanked essentially because of what many people consider to be a natural disaster through no fault of this president?
Well, it's certainly the case that in the early Trump presidency, there was job growth almost, and I will say almost, as good as there was during the Obama presidency. But the reality is the first half of the Trump presidency, or for that matter, anything about the Obama presidency, is a different universe than where we are now. If we want to get an economy that's going to serve the American people well, we've got to be looking to the future. And that means finding ways to support Americans, knowing that things are going to take a long time to get back to where they used to be and are never going to be quite the same. By the way, they shouldn't be quite the same. This isn't just about going back to the old economy with the same weaknesses and the same winners and losers. This is about creating an economy where we'll never be as vulnerable again as we are now. A third of American families with children right now have issues just with hunger, just with getting the food that they need. We are seeing case after case of situations that are just completely should be out of the question for the wealthiest country in the world. And we've got to come back with an economy that benefits everybody, not just the few.
Okay, you had mentioned a moment ago that we need to look to the future. Um, but in early February, you were on CNN, you told Jake Tapper, and granted this was in the middle of the campaign, you said this isn't 2008, it's 2020, and we are in a new moment calling for a different kind of leadership. Joe Biden is still not a different kind of leadership from 2008, is he?
Well, he's a very different kind of leadership from what we have right now in the White House. And I think that's the most important thing. Now, one of the reasons I'm supporting him is that I see in him somebody who is committed to creating better opportunities for a future generation of Americans. And as somebody who belongs to a much younger generation, one that's going to be on the business end of climate change, if we don't have a president who actually believes it's real, one that's going to live with the successes or failures in recovering from this pandemic, one whose lives very much depend on the wisdom and judgment of the next president. I think that the choice could not be more clear between Donald Trump, 4 more years of this chaos and dysfunction, and having somebody like Joe Biden guide this country into a new moment.
Okay, Mr. Mayor, now we're running out of time. I got one more question I wanted to run by you. During her testimony on Capitol Hill, you referred to Christine Blasey Ford as a profile in courage. Would you say the same of Tara Reid right now?
One thing that I think is very important is the way that these things are addressed and handled. And, there's a dramatic difference between the way Vice President Biden openly sat down to take a number of questions on this issue, called for records to be released. And even though his campaign and he have vigorously, and I believe credibly, denied all of these allegations, did so with respect, without insulting anybody, and in a way that's consistent with his lifelong record of supporting women with things like the Violence Against Women Act, which shockingly is being blocked from reauthorization by some of the very same people who are attacking the vice president. The difference could not be clearer. And I think that's worth noting when we have somebody sitting in the Oval Office right now who has been accused of sexual assault by his own voice in a recording where he was boasting about
Okay, Mayor, do I have time to sneak one more question in on you?
it. Sure.
All right, so, and this was, someone brought this up to me who was actually a fan of yours, and this is why I'm asking this. There are a lot of men who are qualified to be vice president right now. Joe Biden has said he is going to be picking a woman as his running mate. A lot of people think you are one of those men who could be qualified to be vice president. And rhetorically, I'm speaking about the person I was talking to. Is the vice president, Joe Biden, saying his running mate is going to be a woman no matter what? Is that not a form of gender discrimination?
I think it's a form of gender balance, and I think it's a good call. Look, there's a lot of evidence and research showing that companies, and for that matter, countries, are more successful when there's gender balance in their leadership. And I think we've come to the point where the era of a top leadership team all looking the same or having the experiences that are basically the same, that era has come to an end, and that's not a bad thing. There are phenomenal women, both among those who ran for president and people who are not so much household names, but I think are great leaders in our party. And look, I don't think anyone walking this earth understands the role of vice president better than Joe Biden. So I trust him to make a good decision.